She stepped, barefoot, up to the water's edge and sunk to her knees. Her gaze traced the tree line, following as it rippled on the surface, dancing with the light of the sunrise. Amongst it all, there she was, looking up to herself deeply and intensely. She watched her face move, imagining she was melting into the land. This moment is best described as a reckoning. In the early morning, she'd come here, lost in her attempts to understand, disappearing to the only place anything made sense. The past persists. It flows in the stream, grows with the trees, writhes in her chest. The girl, much like the place, was haunted. Welcome to Mirrors, a collection of horrors, history, and hauntings. My name is Gabby. As a writer, I've always been drawn to stories of the unexplained. I'll be exploring haunted places around the world, physical spaces that reflect the past and twist the present, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. Season 1 will delve into the history and hauntings of my home state, Pennsylvania. And the first location takes me back to where it all began. For it was here that I learned to observe, to welcome silence and look closely into the darkness. In this town, I experienced things I'll never be able to explain. On this land, I felt myself somewhere new and unexplored, grounded yet transient, an in-between, if you will. I'm in Gettysburg, the site of the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. Testing. Today is Monday, June 3rd. It is 5:46 a.m. and I'm coming to you from Cemetery Hill in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There's a tree here that I absolutely love, and I'm just sitting under the tree on some rocks. The sun is just now rising, and it is absolutely gorgeous right now. This is my favorite time to be in Gettysburg. It's like first thing in the morning. You can hear the birds and the occasional car driving behind me, but for the most part, it is just quiet and peaceful. I love being here at night, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's definitely very spooky, but this is the kind of place where that energy is prevalent all the time. And I think being here in the morning, there's a certain sense you get. It's hard to even explain, but it's peaceful and rejuvenating, and it just feels like you are breathing new air. I don't know, there's something magical about that. But I wanted to start here for this project. I wanted to start in this spot, and you'll find out why in just a few minutes, but there's something here. There's some reason that I feel so connected to this specific place in this spot. On July 1st, 1863, battle broke out in Gettysburg, a small town just north of the Maryland border. For 3 dark days, the war raged on, leaving the town forever stained. Entering Gettysburg, you'll undoubtedly feel the near-tangible heaviness in the air, and you just may encounter a lingering spirit. Here, the past reveals itself in glimpses. In my early mornings in Gettysburg, I've seen flashes of soldiers walking through the battlefield before they disappeared inexplicably. I once even saw a horse, its mane glinting in the sunlight as it ran through the infamous wheat field, until it faded before my eyes. The town of Gettysburg was quite literally a battlefield, and while there, you honestly never know what might happen. This place, Each building, each alley and street corner, each acre of land is the epitome of haunted. There are a few places, though, where the energy is more complex, where the air thickens and all sound fades into an unusual silence. That's where I'll be taking you today. But first, settle in. I have a story to tell you. A few years ago, I did my first ghost tour in Gettysburg, of course. I'd been to Gettysburg countless times before simply because I grew up so close to it. Every time we were there, we'd pass the advertisements for ghost tours, and we'd always say we should do one. Now, let me set the scene. I was at the height of my Twilight and Vampire Diaries obsession. I truly believed that I was destined to end up with a hot, unfortunately fictional vampire. And thus my fascination with all things supernatural and paranormal had been awakened, evolving from my childhood habit of asking a million questions about anything and everything, and probably the fact that I started watching true crime a bit earlier than I should have. So I suggested that we finally went and did a ghost tour. I, along with my mom and our friend Linda, headed to Gettysburg on a misty October evening. The town felt different that night. Maybe it was my own anticipation. Perhaps it was the vibe established by the old buildings and houses decorated with purple Halloween lights. Or I was realizing just how true the rumors are. Gettysburg is a new place when the sun goes down. The only thing I really remember from the tour was our guide's discussion on phantom smells. You might smell lavender or cigar smoke or gunpowder or roses or... That went on for a while, maintaining the same monotone voice the entire time. At one point, my mom even pulled her lavender hand sanitizer spray from her purse and joked about screwing with everyone. We were clearly having a hard time taking it all seriously. We believed, we just were a bit disappointed that nothing out of the ordinary was happening. It felt like there was somewhere else we were meant to be. After the tour, my mom informed us that she was going to drive to the Jenny Wade house, where she had once sworn to see a tear fall from the statue of Jenny Wade, the only civilian killed in the battle. We stood in front of the statue as my mom told us about her experience. She said it was a dry, sunny day when she was walking around town with one of her friends. They stopped at the statue, and a tear fell from Jenny's eye. They both saw the same thing and reached up at the same time to wipe it away. We then walked to the opposite side of the parking lot, towards a small rock wall leading into a part of the battlefield known as Cemetery Hill. None of us had a destination in mind. We just felt like we should stay, like we were waiting for something. The rain had slowed down at this point, leaving a dense fog. My mom was walking into the battlefield, pretty far ahead of me at this point. I looked back to Linda, who had stayed in the parking lot before following after her. Suddenly, my mom gasped, jumped, and ran back towards me, or past me, booking it back to the parking lot and leaving me behind, might I add. That's when it hit me. That chilly fall evening turned cold. The kind of cold that reaches to your core. For a moment, I felt entirely alone on that battlefield. What happened? I asked anxiously, my own voice bringing me back to the moment. Something pushed me, my mom said. Not in an aggressive way, I just felt hands press against my shoulders like I hit a wall. In the car, we theorized about what happened. We decided it was either a ghostly park ranger reminding us that you can't be on the battlefield at night, or it was a soldier, still fighting an unseen war, keeping us from going further. We spoke quickly, full of adrenaline, until Linda interrupted with an "oh my god" from the passenger seat. From the parking lot, she'd been taking pictures of us walking into the battlefield, and she captured that exact moment my mom felt the hands. In this photo, there is something else. My mom was wearing a long-sleeve black jacket, but there is an extension to her arm that is much lighter than her jacket, but darker than her skin tone. Also, I had my long, dark hair down that night past my shoulders, but you can see a skin tone on the back of my neck, like there's a figure behind me. It's hard to explain, so I'll post this on my Instagram and you can check it out for yourself. I'll also note that because of the weather and this photo being taken at night, I'm sure that explains some of the blur and distortion. But I have to admit, there is something so strange and unsettling looking at this picture. I also think it is really cool that this moment is documented because what I felt changed my life. After that, my mom and I made many trips to Gettysburg to try to explain what happened. We opted to explore on our own, researching the history and chatting with locals along the way. We were determined to learn as much as we could about the paranormal and spiritual realm. Our shared curiosity made us grow even closer than we already were, and it facilitated memories that I will hold close to me forever. I lost my mom in July of 2023. My first time going back to Gettysburg after her passing, I was terrified that it wouldn't feel the same, that it would have lost that sense of mysticism. It didn't. I spent that entire day walking through the woods, disappearing up new trails, feeling an even stronger connection. I found pieces of myself that I thought I'd lost in my grief. Once again, seeing Gettysburg as a place like no other. A place of mystery and magic, where the veil thins and we're closer to the unknown than ever before. On July 2nd, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg centered around a cluster of boulders known as Devil's Den. The natural geology played a large role in the soldiers' strategy, as they used the boulders for cover and to inform their positioning. The Confederate Army captured Devil's Den and occupied the area for over 22 hours. It was used as a firing position and was the site of violent close-range combat, with soldiers using their bayonets to fight between the boulders. It's important to note the indigenous history of Devil's Den and the surrounding area, which was a hunting ground and the site of a First Nation conflict called the Battle of Crows. Arrowheads and other indigenous artifacts have been discovered amongst the boulders. That being said, although Gettysburg is known primarily for its connections to the Civil War, its history and significance goes back much farther. Devil's Den was witness to unthinkable violence in 1863, but perhaps its haunting started before then. Stories tell of Confederate guards who felt a disturbing, almost supernatural atmosphere when watching over the area at night. In more recent years, numerous visitors have seen ghostly apparitions, experienced unexplainable technology glitches, or even heard the echoes of gunfire. If you come here, you'll notice that walking between these rocks is almost like a puzzle. It's which direction to go and where to put your feet. You get kind of drawn in to this meditative state. Oh no, I like to just stand in here and put my palms against the rocks, imagining what they were witness to. Charles Babbage was an English mathematician, philosopher, and mechanical engineer. He presented the idea that human words remain in the air long after they are said, which sparked an ongoing conversation around place memory. This was in the late 19th century, when many turned to science to understand why hauntings occur, why certain places are more haunted than others, and why certain people seem to have a deeper connection to the spiritual realm. His ideas were further developed by a psychic researcher and author named Harry H. Prince, who believed in a psychic ether, or an energetic space where memories and thoughts are permanently stored. In 1961, author Charles Lethbridge published Ghost and Ghoul, a collection of his personal encounters with the unexplained throughout his career as an archaeologist. Lethbridge was determined to find evidence of the paranormal rooted in scientific fact. His work concluded that there was still so much more to learn about the world, but perhaps it wasn't too far out of the realm of possibility that events and personal experiences could leave an impression and remain immortalized. These concepts are all centered around the belief in residual energy, which is one of the most widely accepted explanations for ghosts. Especially in a place like Gettysburg, it's not too hard to believe that the deaths, injuries, and traumas of war have left an everlasting impact. The paranormal encounters reported in Gettysburg point to this as well, as the soldiers seem to be on some sort of time loop, still fighting and reliving the horrors of war. That's where these flashes come in, these small glimpses into the past. With this in mind, this is an interesting time of year to be in Gettysburg. As the summer progresses, the temperature rises, and the town nears the 161st anniversary of the battle. In June and July, there's always an influx of visitors coming into town to learn about the history, so the stories are told over and over. I imagine this stirs up the energy in some way. Across from Devil's Den, a small wooden bridge leads into a marshy area known as the Slaughter Pen. Confederates passed through the area as they advanced toward Little Round Top, one of the smaller hills south of Gettysburg. The Union arrived at the peak of Little Round Top, just in time to defend the area. Their position allowed them to pick off Confederate soldiers who were making their way uphill, exhausted and overwhelmed by the July heat. A soldier from the 4th Texas Volunteer Infantry recalled, "Suddenly, we find ourselves at the base of a range of hills, a rough, woody, rocky country. Then commenced a rapid, continuous, and murderous musketry fight. We at the base, they on the sides and top of the hills. Bodies were left strewn down the hillside and throughout the field below, giving it the name, the Slaughter Pen." The concentration of death and violence in this single area goes to show just how vast the carnage truly was. Little Round Top was a critical Union victory, and it's one of the primary reasons Gettysburg is seen as the turning point of the Civil War. Defeating General Lee after a string of successes not only boosted Union morale, but ended the Confederates' last full-scale invasion of the North, setting the stage for the Union's overall victory and the abolishment of slavery in 1865. I am now at Culp's Hill. I'm walking down into the Deadened Woods. In researching for this episode, I came to Gettysburg countless times throughout the spring. And something I observed in doing that journey repeatedly, taking the same roads, visiting the same places, I noticed how different I felt each time, and how each time felt like it was the first time I was there. I think part of that is because it was, transitioning into spring and warmer weather. There were wildflowers blooming. It was also coming out of a few weeks of a lot of rain here in Pennsylvania, so everything was just very green and luscious, and it was just a season of changing. But I was just really aware of how different I felt. Sometimes I would leave and I would feel really refreshed and centered. Other times my heart rate would be elevated for some reason, and I would be really anxious, or I would leave and get this just energy in my chest that I couldn't let go of. It was like I felt like I shouldn't be leaving, but I was. I'm not saying that's 100% paranormal, because I am a quite chaotic person as it is, so it could entirely be just me and my own mood, but I don't know. I think it's something worth noting that I just feel so different every time I'm here. I interact with the environment differently. I just feel like a different person, even being in the same place. Almost as if I was experiencing emotions that weren't mine entirely. The Deadened Woods is really a place that I noticed that. And whether it's paranormal or not, I think it represents just how there's such a thin line here between peace and fear, calm and chaos. It's a truly fascinating place. Culp's Hill was occupied by the Union all 3 days of battle, defending their position against numerous attacks by Confederates. Since it's surrounded by dense woods, it's not like this area was an ideal spot for artillery placement, not like Little Round Top was. There was very little visibility, but it was incredibly important for Northern Army supplies. Defending Culp's Hill also prevented Southerners from advancing further. The Confederate Army had its sights set on Harrisburg and other northern cities, so keeping them from going further was truly a last-ditch effort to keep them from winning the war. In the fall of 1863, Nurse Sophronia Buckland visited Culp's Hill, still entrenched in the aftermath of warfare. She stepped through the tree line into the woods that just a few months prior were witnessed unimaginable violence. Here is how Sophronia described her experience. Earlier in life, it would have been impossible for me to walk over such a field of horror, but I had grown familiar with death in every shape. Yet, when right above my head, at one place, so close it touched me, hung a sleeve of faded army blue, a dead hand protruding from the worn and blackened cuff, I could not but feel a momentary shudder. Despite all she'd seen, this image sobered her like no other. Sophronia went on to write about her experiences as a field nurse, capturing not only her own life and work, but her observations of inequalities against female nurses and patient neglect. Even in her retelling, Sophronia's words conjure this sense of urgency, illustrating how vividly her memories remained long after the war was over. Upon her arrival to Gettysburg, Sophronia described a line of soldiers 1.5 miles long, awaiting care. I think about Sophronia each time I walk through the Deadened Woods, having an almost visceral reaction as I imagine how she felt in that moment of realization to all she had seen. I love learning about individual people within the overarching history. It makes it easier to feel connected to the place, envisioning one person's experiences. It also makes me consider all of the tens of thousands of perspectives we'll never know. Following the battle, over 7,000 bodies were left rotting on the battlefield. As residents returned to town, they were met with the horrific sights and the smell of decaying bodies in the summer heat. Even soldiers, who had already witnessed the realities of war, were in shock by the carnage left in Gettysburg. Vermont Private Wilbur Fisk wrote letters from the battlefield, detailing what he saw. He wrote, "The rebel dead and ours lay thickly together, their thirst for blood forever quenched. Their bodies were swollen, black, and hideously unnatural. Their eyes glared from their sockets, their tongues protruded from the mouths, and in almost every case, clots of blood and mangled flesh showed how they had died and rendered a sight ghastly beyond description. I thought I had become hardened to almost anything, but I cannot say I ever wish to see another sight like that I saw on the battlefield in Gettysburg." Many soldiers were buried hastily in shallow and mass graves, and while efforts were made to later identify and intern these soldiers properly, it was impossible to do so for every individual. Even today, the Gettysburg National Cemetery has 979 unknowns. In the months following the battle, human remains would come up during heavy rain. Decades later, in 1899, a large burial trench was found here on Culp's Hill. As recent as 1996, a visitor came across the remains of a soldier while touring the railway cut. There's a belief that people die twice. Once upon their physical death, and once when their name is no longer spoken aloud. Perhaps that is why Gettysburg is so haunted. Names have gone unsaid, stories untold, souls left struggling to find peace. All this time later, and we'll never really know how many soldiers remain on the battlefield. I drove off of the battlefield a little bit, and now I'm here at Sach's Bridge. Sach's Bridge was used by both Union and Confederate troops as they entered town. and it was a silent witness to the Southern retreat after the battle. Legend tells of 3 Confederates who were executed on the bridge and hung from the rafters. Allegedly, they were discovered trying to desert on July 4th during the Confederate retreat. Their bodies were left hanging as a warning for every soldier passing over Marsh Creek. These soldiers are said to haunt the bridge, along with other spirits who manifest through the smell of cigar smoke, disembodied voices, or even full-body apparitions. I've also heard stories of physical, sometimes even aggressive activity, ranging from taps on the shoulders to being pushed to the ground. I visit Sach's Bridge every time I go to Gettysburg, and it's often pretty quiet. I actually like to sit there in the mornings or at sunset to write. However, there are those rare moments where the energy shifts. While recording at the bridge, I recalled some of the paranormal experiences I've had there. One time I came here and there was a couple at the other end of the bridge that were doing an EVP session. EVP stands for electronic voice phenomena, and it is believed that spirits can be heard through recordings even if their voices and words are not heard in real time. So they were doing an EVP session. I was completely silent on the other side, just kind of listening in to see if they caught anything. They did a round going through asking questions like, is anyone here? What's your name? Is there anything you'd like to share with us? And they played it back. And in one of those chunks of silence, there was this blood-curdling scream that sounded like someone just put their face up to the microphone and screamed as loud as they possibly could. The sound was just so raw and human. I remember I looked over to them and they looked at me, and we all had wide eyes and were just in shock. I wish I would have thought to ask them for a copy of the recording, because it was one of the coolest things that I've heard. And I mean, I was sitting here with them. I obviously witnessed that they were not making any noise in that time, and they didn't edit it in any way. We were just, they recorded it and they listened to it back, and that's what came through. So that was really, really cool. Also, it's hard to think that someone might be in that much pain still. And that's why I think this bridge is so haunted, because it is one part of the battle that is confined in a certain space. To think of the people that cross the bridge going into battle and the fear and anxiety of that, but also then the people that crossed it while leaving after, what they had just witnessed and experienced. It definitely would lead to a haunting, I believe. The first time I came to the bridge, I got this tightness around my throat, and it didn't go away until we left. And then I looked in the mirror and I had red marks around my throat. Like, it wasn't painful, but it was very noticeable that I got this tightness, and then it, actually produced marks on my skin. And that was before I knew about the supposed executions here. So it was very strange. One of the coolest paranormal experiences I've had happened on this bridge. I was with 2 of my cousins, and we all love to go ghost hunting together because weird things just happen when we're together. I don't know what it is, but they do. And we came to the bridge. It was like a rainy afternoon. We just had this great vibe going. I had out an obulus, which spits out words from a database, and the belief there is that if words are related to what you're talking about or to the history and the stories of the hauntings, that it could be you communicating with a spirit. So I'll have to go back and look at the words that came through specifically, but it was something it said beautiful, And then I sat down and started to set up my equipment. My little cousin, Jaden, sat down next to me. And then it said, sit. And my cousin Sarah was still standing, so she sat down. And then it said, ring. So then Sarah was like, oh, well, yeah, I'm married. The spirit said its name is Nathan. And then asked Sarah to go to dinner. So we still joke about there being a flirty spirit on the bridge named Nathan. I think what was cool about that experience was like there was so much more to it that I don't remember exactly, but it felt like we were having a conversation with a person. I think a lot of what the Gettysburg hauntings are is residual energy, and people reliving what they experienced during the battle. But that was like we were sitting with someone our age who was just having an intelligent conversation back and forth with us. It was also like we really could feel someone sitting down with us in this little circle. So it's just a few of the stories of things that have happened to me on the bridge. But like I said, you never know. You never know what else could happen. In Gettysburg, where a 3-day battle resulted in over 50,000 casualties, historical significance has converged with devastating loss and destruction. It's created an interesting environment where hauntings aren't confined between four walls, and an encounter can happen at any time, anywhere in the town. Today's episode is just the beginning. For the next 2 weeks, I'll be taking you along with me to other paranormally active spots in Gettysburg, before we move on to other Pennsylvania locations. Each season will end with a listener stories episode, so if you have a Pennsylvania-based encounter you'd like to share, send a message to mirrorspod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Mirrors. You can follow the show at Mirrors Podcast on Instagram and TikTok, and subscribe to the Patreon for bonus episodes and other exclusive content. All links will be in the show notes. Until next time, stay spooky. This has been Mirrors, Horrors, History, and Hauntings, produced and hosted by Gabby Frye.